We are in Joshua 22. Yes, Joshua 22 this evening. Joshua chapter 22, where we are getting very near the end of the book of Joshua, where these last three chapters are really kind of the final section. Joshua is completed his task that God has given him to lead the way in conquering the land. And the 23 and 24 are going to be primarily about speeches that he gives toward the end of his life. But chapter 22 is sort of the transition to this new time in Israel's history where they're not conquering the land actively anymore. They have, in essence, conquered almost all of it, and they're now kind of settling down to just live in the land. And there's sort of a danger, you could say, or a temptation that now that they have the land and there's not the battle, the conflict, that they might kind of forget what they were there for in the first place. And so in Joshua 22, there's this encouragement to keep on choosing God, to keep on following God, to continue in this path, though it may look different than it used to. The goal is still the same. And of course, as always, every chapter of Joshua, I think, is about courage. That's kind of the main theme, the main idea throughout the book of Joshua. And so, really, in chapter 22, it's about how there's courage needed. That courage, to kind of cling tighter to God. There's always, even when there's not battles happening, there's always our need to cling tighter to God, to find the courage to keep on choosing Him. Starting there in verse 1, chapter 22 and verse 1, it says, Joshua called the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, and he said to them, You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I have commanded you. You have not left your brethren these many days up to this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brethren, as he promised them. Now therefore return and go to your tents and to the land of your possession, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. And there's something, I think, very valuable in sometimes stopping and remembering with a kind of a positive light, we have been faithful. That people that we've known that have been faithful, or things that we have been a part of where we did them faithfully for God, and that sometimes we need that encouragement, that reminder of, sometimes we focus a lot on our past sins. Sometimes we need to stop and remember our past successes through God and the things that we've done well together. And so Joshua, he says, you've done a really great job, and what specifically have these three tribes been doing that's kind of different from the other tribes? There's the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. They kind of have a kind of separate thing going on from the rest of the tribes.
They've been helping them conquer the promised land.
Yes. Yeah.
They left their land and helped their brothers.
That's right. And so these are the 2.5 tribes that back when Moses was still alive, before they'd ever even crossed the Jordan River into the promised land, they had already conquered the other side of the Jordan River, and these 2.5 tribes had said, we would like to live on this side. And Moses said, well, that's great. You can have this land. It can be yours. But don't think that excuses you from going to the other side and continuing to help us to conquer the rest of the promised land. And so they gave their word, and they said, we'll go, and we'll battle as long as it takes to win it. We'll be there. And their wives and their children stayed on this side, but the men of war went in with them. And so Joshua says this has probably been, since they crossed the promised land, this has probably been 6 or 7 years that they really have been away from home primarily, and that they have been on the other side of the Jordan River, just kind of following Joshua around, or going where Joshua tells them, to help the other 10 tribes conquer the land that God was giving them. And so if you remember at the end of chapter 21, there at the end of chapter 21, it said God had fulfilled the promise, and they had completed the task. They had conquered the land at that point. And everything that God said would happen, as much as they went and did it, those last 4 words of verse 45 all came to pass. And so now that it's finished, these 2.5 tribes get to go home. And Joshua was happy to commend them for faithfully sticking with what they said they would do. But it's in those transition times sometimes when we're going from one type or one kind or one portion of life to a different portion of life that it can be easy to lose track of what really matters. And you think people who go from not having kids to having kids, people who go from not being married to being married, or sometimes later in life the flip side of that, from being married to not being married, or people who go from one position, one job to a different job. Any kind of transition that you can think of, there's that opportunity to lose sight of what really matters. And so that's why he says in verse 5, he says, take careful heed to do the commandments and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. And so Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. And so he really, in a very short space of time, he really jam-packed a lot of instructions for these people who are going to go to their portion of the land. He said, first of all, to do the commandments. And that's really, it's just the basic idea of what your actions are. They're supposed to, with their hands, with their feet, do whatever it is that God had told them to do. And that's the simple part. From there, he gives them some motivations or some thoughts about how to do those things. He says, we do them, first of all, with love, to love the Lord your God. And so this desire for a close relationship with God, that they're doing them because they want to be in a relationship with God. He says, then next, not just they do them and love them, but that they walk in all of his ways. And whenever you see the idea of walking with God, that almost always is a reference back to Genesis chapter 5. And you remember it says there, all it says about Enoch, the only thing it tells us about this tremendous person who didn't even have to die was just that he walked with God. And I think we've talked about this before. You think, who wrote the book of Genesis? Well, that's Moses when they were wandering in the wilderness. And you think, what is it that the people with Moses did day in and day out, primarily for 40 years? All that they really did was walk around. That's what they did. There's the pillar of fire and cloud, and all they really had to do for 40 years was just walk behind it. And that might have been sort of depressing to them, because they were supposed to inherit the land. They were supposed to conquer the land. And Moses says, we have to just face the reality of where we are. We may not like our circumstances because they were supposed to be better than they are, but somehow we have messed them up and they're not as good as they should be. But even if that's true, we can still walk with God. And so walking kind of has that idea of that I really crave to be as close to God as possible. I'm walking as close to that pillar of fire and cloud as I can possibly get. And so we love him. We want that relationship. We walk with him. We're trying to get as close to him as we possibly can. Next, he says that we keep his commandments. And so keep is always the idea of to guard something, to protect something. He has given commandments, and we guard them with our actions, with our words. Whenever we choose not to do his commandments, it's to let our guard down and to violate them. And so we guard them by doing them, by keeping them. And then he says to hold fast. Keep his commandments and hold fast to him. That word is very often translated to chase something down and then to grab on really tight. And so that, my eagerness to chase God and cling to him, whatever happens in life, so that ultimately, he says, I can serve him. To serve him with all of your heart and with all of your soul. That service is the idea of loyalty to the work, to the kingdom. That all of our decisions and all of my life's purpose, you can think heart as decisions, you can think of soul as with every breath I take, this is the purpose behind it. So that I can serve the work of the king. That kind of interesting, if you look at Genesis 2:15, all the way back to the very beginning, when God kind of says, this is the purpose of humanity. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15, it says, the Lord God took the man and he put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and to keep it. Keep is that same word to protect it, to guard it, to keep it safe. Tend is that same word to serve. His whole entire purpose, all of his decisions, and with every breath he took, was centered around working, tending, serving, doing the job for the God who created him and who gave him so much. Moses is drawing on that, Joshua is drawing on that idea here and says they have that same opportunity, not in the Garden of Eden, but in the home, the promised land that God had blessed them with. And I think you could say that really we have that same opportunity today, not for the Garden of Eden and not for a literal promised land, a physical one, I should say, but for the church, for the spiritual promised land that God has given us to tend and to keep today. And so he really says a whole lot there very quickly that if you kind of boil it all down, it kind of comes to the idea of they are devoted to keep on choosing God with every ounce of who they are, every fiber in their being. They are devoted. I'm not going to let this transition distract me from all the faithfulness we've already shown and from whatever time that I have left on this earth. I'm just here for God in every possible way. Any thoughts or comments before we move on to the next section? Okay. Well, he picks up then in verse 7, and here he kind of begins to bring the conflict into mind, that they've done a good job and they're going home, but there's this potential for trouble. It says in verse 7, now to half the tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given a possession in Bashan, but to the other half of it, Joshua gave a possession among their brethren on this side of the Jordan westward. And indeed, when Joshua sent them away to their tents, he blessed them and spoke to them, saying, return with much riches to your tents, with very much livestock, with silver, with gold, with bronze, with iron, and with very much clothing. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brethren. And so the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh returned, and departed from the children of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to their country of Gilead, to the land of their possession, which they had obtained according to the word of the Lord by the hand of Moses. This is all according to the word of God. But any time that there is a very great degree of wealth, what usually comes with that?
Envy.
There's the potential, anyway, for envy. Yes, certainly so. And notice he's already kind of mentioned there's this tribe of Manasseh that's sort of been split in half. And so it's like some of you are getting some of this, and some of you are getting some of this. And so whenever somebody gets some of a great degree of wealth, that opens up that door for temptation. Doesn't mean it has to, you have to give into it, but it opens up the door. And so there's that dividing the spoils can create conflict. In the book of Daniel, it talks about the time in history, and maybe you're familiar, when Alexander the Great conquered the whole world, in essence, the whole world. And he went from Greece all the way over to India, this huge, no one had ever conquered so much land before. And then at a very young age, he died, much quicker than anyone thought he would. And so there were 4 generals who fought with him, and they were all like, best friends kind of, and they did all of these great things together, and they seemed like this unified body of men. But as soon as he died, what did those 4 men do? They split the kingdom up 4 ways, and Daniel talks about that, and then they spent the next couple hundred years just fighting each other for more of it, right? That's whenever there's great degrees of wealth to be had, there's almost always conflict over those things. And so he continues in verse 10, and he says, when they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great, impressive altar. The idea of it's bigger than any other altar that you could see. It was like a giant statue of an altar almost. And so verse 11, the children of Israel heard someone say, behold, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan. in the region of the Jordan on the children of Israel's side. And when the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered together at Shiloh to go to war against them. And in essence, what he describes there is, there's the people who live on this side of the Jordan. And as they're going home, they build this giant altar, almost like a statue of an altar. And that's the thing about wealth is it gives you options to build things, doesn't it? You could build things that you can't build. You can always tell who has the most money because they have the biggest house. I mean, not always, but generally speaking, they can build more. And then, as they build this giant altar, the people hear about it. Now, how many altars did God allow them to have in the Promised Land? Just the one, right? Wherever the Ark of the Covenant was, that's where they could make the sacrifices each year. And so they have built one that looks just like it, but bigger. And they assume, well, they're trying to set up, in essence, another religion, another spot to worship God. And they're showing off too, right? They built a really big one. It's bigger than ours. Every time someone builds a skyscraper, they're always trying to make it taller than the tallest one in the world, right? Everyone wants to make the biggest and the best and whatever, our country is better than your country and so they're thinking that, they're on the other side of the Jordan and they built this massive altar so that they can show off, look how much we have and what we can accomplish. And worse, if they worship on it, they are disobeying God. Now, what had they already learned from the incident with Achan? One man's sin. One man's sin can destroy the entire nation. And so they say, we're not sinning, but if they're worshiping on this, that could be the end of all of us. And so there's that accountability. They feel the need to go and to confront them. And so it says at the end, verse 12, they gathered together at Shiloh. Now that's where they were keeping the actual ark with the actual altar. They gathered together at Shiloh to go to war against them. And so that's the other thing that great wealth does. It gives us the option to fight when otherwise we may not be able to fight. With great wealth, you can either build or you can fight. And that's what these two groups are doing. But thankfully, they didn't just run in and pull out swords and start attacking people. Verse 13 says, Then the children of Israel sent Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest to the children of Reuben, to the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh into the land of Gilead. And with him 10 rulers, and one from the chief house of every tribe of Israel. So all these leaders go to meet with the people on the other side of the river. And they spoke with them, saying, verse 16, Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, What treachery is this that you have committed against the God of Israel, to turn away this day from following the Lord, and that you have built for yourselves an altar, that you might rebel this day against the Lord. Notice how they talk about it. This is rebellion. Verse 17, Is the iniquity of Peor not enough for us, from which we are not cleansed till this day, although there was a plague in the congregation of the Lord? Now, the iniquity of Peor goes back to the book of Numbers. Do y'all remember the story of Balaam and how he kind of tricked the people into sinning with the women of Moab? And specifically, that's significant here because of who's speaking. Phinehas, who will someday be the high priest, and at this moment is one of the priests. He's the son of the high priest. He's the one that ended the plague that he's talking about. And that's one of the men brought those women into the area of the ark, and Phinehas ended the plague by ending their lives. And he says, a lot of people died that day because of the sin of just a few people. And so he says there was a plague in the congregation of the Lord. And verse 18, But you must turn away this day from following the Lord. It shall be, if you rebel today against the Lord, that tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. Nevertheless, if the land of your possession is unclean, then cross over to the land of the possession of the Lord, where the Lord's tabernacle stands. Take possession among us. Do not rebel against the Lord, nor rebel against us, by building yourselves an altar besides the altar of the Lord our God. And that's really very significant of what they've said here. Remember kind of where we started with this. Great wealth tends to create envy and great conflict among people, trying to keep what you have. But in order to prevent rebellion against God, what did they offer their brothers across the river? Their own space, their own resources. They said, we would rather you move back over here to our side and take some of our cities, take some of our houses, take some of our land where we grow crops. We can all squish together if we have to. Losing physical things would be so much better than you living in a place that tempts you to rebel against the Lord and bring discipline upon all of us. And so, at the end of verse 19, it says, building yourselves an altar besides the altar, an additional altar that God has not approved of, that God hasn't said we should or could build. And so, it kind of asks the question throughout this chapter of, if great blessings and riches allow us to build more, or even to fight sometimes, are we building and fighting for God? Or are we building and fighting for more riches, for the things of this life, for ourselves? And the people from across the river are saying, we are here to fight a war if we have to, but it's a war for God, to protect the people of God. And we're here to help make sure that things are going right. And so verse 20, they reference Achan. Did not Achan, the son of Zerah, commit a trespass and the accursed thing? And wrath fell on all the congregation of Israel. And that man did not perish alone in his iniquity. And this reminder, one man's sin can affect a lot of people. And so, did riches lead them to rebel? And is it impacting the whole flock here? But they're willing to share and surrender their riches in order to help them in that rebellion. It picks up in verse 21 then. Any thoughts or comments on what we've looked at so far? Yes.
Why did they build that in the first place?
That's what they're fixing to tell us.
Okay.
That's exactly the question that you were supposed to ask.
Okay.
And that's what they've been that's what they've been asking all the way through. And so verse 21, they're going to explain themselves and help us understand that. And so he says, then the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh answered and said to the heads of the divisions of Israel, the Lord God of gods, the Lord God of gods, he knows, and let Israel itself know. Right? God knows what we're doing. If you could ask him right now, he would tell you exactly what's going on here. If it is in rebellion, or if in treachery against the Lord, he says, we won't even fight you. You can pull out your swords and we'll just let you do what you're going to do if we are in rebellion to God right now. Trying to convince them that they are not in rebellion. Verse 23, if we have built ourselves an altar to turn from following the Lord, to offer it on a burnt offering or grain offerings, or to offer peace offerings on it, let the Lord himself require an account. But in fact, we have done it for fear, for a reason, saying, in time to come, your descendants may speak to our descendants, saying, what have you to do with the Lord God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a border between you and us. Your children of Reuben and children of Gad, you have no part in the Lord. And so your descendants would make our descendants cease fearing the Lord. So in essence, what they're saying here is, because there's a river between us, right? That's a natural borderline in a lot of places. Where did they decide to draw the border between Texas and Oklahoma? That's why it's so bumpy at the top, right? Because it's just easy to follow the river. Same at the bottom with the Rio Grande. Rivers are a natural border between countries. And they said, as they're walking home and thinking, we did the right thing to fight for their land. But there's a river here. And we're afraid that in future generations, they're going to forget what we did for them. They're going to forget that we're all related. Did you notice in verse 25, he said that their children, their descendants might say, you're the children of Reuben and Gad, but they didn't mention the half tribe of Manasseh. Like, you're going to forget that half of you are like cousins directly to us, and forget that we're connected in any possible way. It says, maybe someday you're going to forget about this. And so when we come to worship God where the tabernacle is, you're going to tell us we can't be here. You're going to tell us we're not of the same blood, we're not of the same people, we don't worship the same God, and so you can't be here. And they said, your descendants would make our descendants cease fearing the Lord at the end of verse 25. We're thinking about the future. And we're afraid that the Jordan is going to be a division line that is too powerful to keep all of our peoples together. So we built this giant altar, and that's verse 26. Therefore we said, let us now prepare to build ourselves an altar, not for burnt offering, nor for a sacrifice. We don't intend to use it. We're not going to kill any animals here. We're not going to worship God here. But that it may be a witness between you and between us and between our generations after us, that we may perform the service of the Lord before him with our burnt offerings, with our sacrifices, with our peace offerings, that your descendants may not say to our descendants in time to come, you have no part in the Lord. And in essence, they're saying, we didn't build a bigger one to show you up. We built a bigger one because it's not really supposed to be used. The size of it was supposed to make it very obvious that it's a statue. It's a monument. It's a reminder. Yeah, they call it a witness that it's a. And notice he continues in verse 28. Therefore we say that it will be when they say this to us or to our generations in time to come, that we may say, here is the replica. Right? It's just a picture of it in essence, so that when you look at it in future generations, and then you go home and you look at the one that's in front of the tabernacle, you say they're identical, and they built it. And so if they're identical, but the people on the other side of the river built it, it must be that at some point in the past we were all connected, we were all one. And so it's a lesson and a reminder. Now, I think this is a really key thought, because what is Joshua known for doing over and over and over again throughout the book of Joshua? Every turn and every step, what is he doing? Yeah, they cross the Jordan River. He says 12 men need to pick up stones and build a witness, a memorial, a reminder. He stands in the middle of Jordan himself and picks up 12 stones that stack higher than the river as a witness, a memorial. And over and over again, it's just repeated. Joshua is always building reminders and memorials so that future generations will look at those things and say, what is that for? And then their dad would say, oh, well, that's the time that we crossed the Jordan River and God parted it, and so forth and so on. And so that people can learn the history of God's people, and they can be connected to those who came before them, and so that they can know their purpose, they can know their place, they can know who is the God that got us here, and what God should we keep on choosing. And that really is that main idea here of chapter 22. We want our descendants to keep on choosing God. And so we asked ourselves, what's the biggest barrier between them and choosing God? Well, it's that Jordan River. And so we are building this giant replica to remind them when they walk by the Jordan River, what is that huge thing over there, Dad? Well, that's the time that we built, so forth and so on. And then when your children walk by it on their side of the river, what is that giant thing? Well, our brothers across the river built that for this reason and that reason. So that when people see it, they ask the question and they learn the history, and they stay connected to the God that brought them into the promised land in the first place, because we want to keep choosing God, even though there's transition here that may pull us away. Verse 28, here is the replica of the altar of the Lord, which our fathers made, though not for burnt offering. We're not going to use it, not for sacrifices. The only thing it is a witness between you and between us. Verse 29, far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord, to turn from following the Lord this day. That's the last thing we want to do, to build an altar for burnt offerings and grain offerings and sacrifices, beside, the idea of other than the altar of the Lord our God, which is before his tabernacle. And so that is the exact right question to ask. Did that answer? Okay, yeah. And so that's always, I think, a really good thing. Whenever I find myself asking a question and I find the answer in the next verse, it's like I'm on the right track. I know I'm asking the right questions. And so, and very often when I ask questions and I don't know the answer to this, I just, eventually when I do get around to reading the next verse, I think I should have read this sooner, because there's the answer right there, And so the Bible is very good about helping us to ask the right questions if we're reading it with honest hearts and openly, really thinking about it. And so here, there's really kind of a humble wisdom in what they're doing. They have all of these great riches that they fought for, that God has blessed them with, and what do they spend it on first? The first thing they spend their riches on.
God's remembering God.
Remembering God, choosing to keep, or trying to keep choosing God. There's that courage and that I want to be close to God that causes someone to take their resources and first spend it on what's going to get me and future generations closer to God. Keep on choosing God. Any other comments right there? All right, and so in verse 30, it says that when Phineas the priest, like he's kind of been leading all of this, asking the questions. He was the one that was sort of there kind of leading the possibility for battle. When Phineas the priest and the rulers of the congregation, the heads of the divisions of Israel who were with him, heard the words that the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the children of Manasseh spoke, it pleased them. They recognized the wisdom and the sacrifice, the courage that was being displayed here. And so Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, said to the children of Reuben and to all of them, "This day we perceive that the Lord is among us, because you have not committed this treachery against the Lord." Now, what do they mean by the Lord is among us? We perceive that. Their fear was that by sinning, if they did build this giant altar to sacrifice on, that by committing that sin, that God was not with them, in the sense that he wasn't with them when they tried to conquer Ai after Achan's sin. He wasn't going to help them to succeed that day. And so he says that was our fear, that we had lost that aid from God in day-to-day life because of this sin. Now we see God is still right here, because there's no sin that we can see. We don't know of any sin here. And so to our perception, we perceive God is still going to be doing all the things that he promised if we'll stick with his word. Now you have delivered the children of Israel out of the hand of the Lord. And so there's this wisdom to build this. And then I really think it's pretty amazing what Phinehas does here. And of course he accepts it. But notice how they didn't come and just jump into battle right away. And I think for a lot of people, or a lot of congregations in the church, that is the temptation. You hear about another congregation of the Lord's church doing something that you can't say for certain is sin, but it certainly doesn't sound like it's going in the right direction. They've decided to have some change in the way that they're doing things that you can't point to a verse and say, well, that it's not like they added the instrument, or it's not like they're teaching that baptism is not essential for salvation. They're not doing anything that's obvious like that, but it doesn't sound wise. And it doesn't, maybe you know of other cases where churches did that and it did lead the wrong direction. And it's not that there isn't cause for concern. Phinehas had legitimate concern here, and he did the right thing to go and ask the question. When someone builds a giant altar that's not the one God commanded, they should go and investigate and ask those questions. Why is this here? Because we feel like you're starting to go in the wrong direction. It looks like you are starting to want to worship God in the wrong place and on the wrong altar. He was right to ask the questions. But sometimes I think out of fear or whatever it may be, it's easy to just start the attack, especially with social media. It's easy to just get on Facebook and say, well, this church over here is now in apostasy because they've added this thing, and to start calling out everybody that you know, or telling people to stop going there, or to stop supporting the missions that they're doing, or what have you. And it's not that there isn't reason for concern. If a church is doing something that seems like it may be taking them away from God, just like Phinehas is doing here, we perhaps maybe do want to ask some questions and kind of see, well, what are y'all thinking about here? Because we're very confused, and we're not really sure that this is a good thing. And we, not that we're the police of other congregations, but just we care about their souls too, and we care about our souls. And what is going on right here? It was right to ask the questions. It's easy to not ask questions and just say, well, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt and assume it's all fine. That's not what Phinehas did either. But it's not right to just jump in and start attacking congregations and saying, well, they clearly are just becoming liberal, or clearly are just becoming this or that or whatever, when we don't really know the details. And one of the great things that God did with the church is he didn't give us some kind of organization that's over the congregations beyond Jesus himself. He didn't give us, a president to rule over on earth. He didn't give us a board of directors to say, well, this is what the church does and doesn't do. Every church is responsible for itself. Every church is autonomous. According to the elders, when there are elders at least, according to the elders that are responsible there, that are chosen there. And so a church down the road, which has maybe very different people in very different circumstances, might choose to do something that would be a mistake here, and that maybe is a mistake in other places. It does not necessarily mean that it's a mistake there. Their elders may understand things we don't know, and they may have a good reason for what they're doing. It doesn't mean we don't ask. What is going on here? This is concerning to us. But it certainly doesn't mean we attack without knowing more information. And I think it's easy to do both. It's easy to just ignore it and act like it's not happening because we don't want to deal with that. It's easy to just jump in and start accusing people publicly even when out of a fear or what have you, because we don't want to be perceived as supporting that thing that we have concerns about. Phineas came to ask, I don't know that it's necessarily wrong to build this, but it certainly would be wrong to use it. What are y'all doing here? And they said, we never intended to use it. What would have happened if he had just attacked? Or what would have happened if they had just said, well, I hope that they're not using it, and they never went to check, and they were intending to use it? Going back to Achan, what would have happened then too? They asked the questions, they listened, and they were pleased, it said. Verse 32, Phineas the son of Eleazar the priest and the rulers returned from the children of Reuben and the children of Gad, from the land of Gilead to the land of Canaan, to the children of Israel, and brought back word to them. And so, the thing pleased, really, the whole nation is the idea. The children of Israel, and the children of Israel blessed God. They spoke no more of going against them in battle to destroy the land where the children of Reuben and Gad dwelt. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad called the altar Witness. Right? They gave it a name so that maybe even their future generations wouldn't get confused and start using it. That to me would be, if I were alive then, that would be my concern personally, is it's great that you're going to use it as a monument, but haven't you created something that people could later worship on falsely? That would be my concern, I think, if I were alive then. And so they named it Witness, maybe hoping the future generations would understand what it's for and would not think that it was there to be worshipped with, to be sacrificed on. They called the altar Witness, for it is a witness between us, between these two sides of the river. It's a witness, a reminder. The Lord is God. That goes all the way back to Deuteronomy 6, where he says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The very heart of the Old Testament idea of everything that they do revolves around the fact that there is a God, and that he is one God. He is the only God, and he is the God that all of his people should follow, regardless of whether they live on this side or that side of the river. And nothing should ever come between God's people, not even a physical barrier. Nothing should come between God's people, because if God is one, his people must be one. Isn't that what Jesus prayed about in John 17, the night before he died? Let them be one. And so there's that kind of wrapped up into there. They had the wisdom to accept it, and they were eager to kind of each possess their own inheritance in harmony with the others, not going to battle like the Greeks did, not taking each other's possessions. This is mine and that's yours. This is what God blessed me with. That's what God blessed you with. And in harmony, we have this piece of all that God has given us. What else? What other thoughts or comments do we have about this section tonight? All right. It's kind of a different story. I don't hear it preached on a lot or talked about a lot, and so but it was interesting to me anyway to kind of look at what they're doing there. So thanks for your attention. I guess